Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today I'm going to help you set up popular emulators for any Android device. That means Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 2, GameCube, Wii, 3DS, and everything on down. Everything you need is in this video. Jump to whatever timestamp you want, or watch from the beginning, depending on what you need. This is going to be a general guide to help you get set up and ready to go, and so it won't have any per game specific tweaks or anything like that. But I will get you to a spot that generally should make things playable depending on your device and depending on the power of your device. When you're done with this guide, you'll need to check out my Daijisho guide, as that's the front end that will combine everything from today into a nice interface to launch all of your games from. If you're planning on using a phone with a controller of some sort, when we get to emulator configurations, just attach your controller to the device or connect it before opening the emulator, as you'll need it to do proper configurations. Moving on to software, you're going to need ROMs and BIOS files. I have a whole video on this subject called Retro Game ROMs and BIOS and basically where and how to get them. If you're new to this space and have no idea what those two things are, you'll need to watch that video first and then come back. For everyone else, if you want them on your micro SD card, I would suggest having Android format the SD card first, then move your ROMs over. So insert your SD card into your device, and this part will be different for every device. Sometimes you get a notification dropdown and you can do it that way, or you can head to Android settings and then storage, and you'll see it there. But you want to format your SD card as portable storage. Don't choose internal, it's not worth it. After that, you can easily just create a ROMs folder on that card and put all your ROMs in there if you like, or in subfolders per platform. It's really up to you. This is how I have mine set up if you'd prefer just a copy. The names of the folders don't matter at all, so you can name them anything you like. By the way, the app I'm using for file management is called Solid Explorer, and I highly recommend it. And now we're ready. So let's start with RetroArch, which is the most popular platform that houses emulators for a whole bunch of different consoles. Too many to list. The general idea is we're using RetroArch for all platforms under PlayStation 1. We will not be using the Play Store version as that's out of date, so head to RetroArch.com and then download, then scroll down to the Android section and you want to click download for the 64-bit option. If for whatever reason this doesn't download for you, use a different browser, like Chrome or Firefox. Open that downloaded ABK file and click install. You might get a warning about unknown sources depending on your device. Just allow it if so. Open the RetroArch app after downloading and remember to just have your controller connected before doing so. You should get a pop-up about allowing read-write permissions. Don't skip this step, click OK and then allow. And now we're headed into RetroArch, and if you're finding it extremely zoomed in and just ugly, let's fix that first. Head to the settings cog and then scroll down to user interface. Now appearance. And change menu scale factor to whatever makes the text look better for you. For me, that's usually 0.75x or 0.5x, depending on the device. Either way, set that, and now I'm going to teach you something you need to make a habit. Anytime you make any changes in RetroArch, you have to manually save those changes. There's no autosave. So to do so, we're going to back out of this screen a few times using the navbar in Android, or you can use the home button on the right, and we want the main menu. Then configuration file, and you want to select Save Current Configuration. Remember, do this anytime you make any change in RetroArch, and I'll remind you again as we go, or nothing will save. Okay, for those using controllers or devices with buttons, Let's set that up so you can navigate a bit easier. Head to the settings cog again, and this time we want to head to input, and then all the way to port 1 controls. Now, this is where we want to tell RetroArch what buttons we want to use for it. So starting with the first option, this is if you want to use the left analog stick to move your character around in consoles that only had a D-pad. So the original Game Boy is one example. I set this to left analog. Now just select each button and map it to what you want. So D-pad up to D-pad up on your controller, and keep going. The face buttons tell you exactly what to expect. So A is on the right button, B for down. It's the Nintendo controller layout. Map everything up to gun trigger, but don't map gun trigger unless you know what that is. When you're done, scroll up and click Save Controller Profile. Now back out, and if you're using a controller, the B button should work now for backing out. Let's jump into the hotkeys menu. Hotkeys are shortcuts we can do to fast forward content, save and exit, load a save state, bring up the menu, and a whole bunch of things like that. Everyone has different preferences here, but the general idea is that the hotkey enable button is the button you press plus one of the other buttons we're going to set, and that's the shortcut. So I like to use L3 for hotkey enable, so let's set that. Now, to get the RetroArch menu to show up in games, I want to set that to X, which on my controller is the top button. So now, if I'm in game and I push L3 plus X together, I'll get the RetroArch menu to show up. Let's keep going. For quit, which is an important one as it allows you to safely exit RetroArch, I'm setting that to R3. Fast forward toggle is set to R2. I prefer toggle as I don't need to continually push the combination, but if you prefer to hold both buttons down for as long as you need fast forward, you can map R2 to hold instead, or another button. Load state I set to L1. Save state to R1. And then show FPS I set to Y, or my left button. And that's it. Back out when you're done and head back to the main menu and save current configuration as we've made a bunch of changes. Head back to the settings cog and go to saving. And this part is personal preference. I like my games to load right to where I left off, which was a saved state. And I like them to save state when I exit RetroArch, so no extra input from me before closing. I want this automatic. If you're like me, then turn on both auto save state and load save state automatically. The only other option I would change here, if you wanted, is write saves to content directory and write states to content directory. Currently, all your saves and states are in the RetroArch folder on the internal storage, under the saves and states subfolders. However, if you want those saves and states to be in the same directory as your ROMs, select those two options. Back out again, and now let's do one other change, and that's achievements. This is optional, but if you want retro achievements, this is the section to do it. If you have no idea what that is, head to retroachievements.org and learn more. It's achievements for retro games. Anyways, turn it on and enter your username and password, and then make sure you turn off hardcore mode. Unless you're like a hardcore person, I guess. Let's head all the way back and save current configuration again. Now the last thing I want to show you is where you need to put your BIOS files. If you head back to Settings, then Directory, the first option is System/BIOS, and if you leave it highlighted, it shows you the path. This is where you want to put your BIOS files, or simply put, it's in your RetroArch system folder on your internal storage. Drop your BIOS files in there, and it's just the files, no other directories. Okay, that's just about it for settings. Let's add the actual cores, which is what you need to play the games. Head all the way back to the main menu, then Online Updater, and Core Downloader. Now you'll see a whole long list of consoles and emulator names. I'm going to show you the consoles and platforms that I play and pick, but you might have others. There's so many here that you likely have to Google the best RetroArch core for whatever emulator you want if it's one that I don't show today. So let's scroll through, and remember, anything above PlayStation 1 we're going to do outside of RetroArch. The RetroArch cores for above PlayStation 1, including Nintendo DS, are bad. Don't bother. If I'm skipping a popular platform like that here, there's a good reason. So Final Burn Neo for arcade games, Gambate for Game Boy and Game Boy Color, MGBA for Game Boy Advance games, Messen for NES, SNES 9X Current for Super Nintendo, Flycast for Dreamcast, Genesis Plus GX for Genesis, and Swan Station for PlayStation 1. Perfect. We're all set here, and we can save configuration again and exit RetroArch. Now, you have the option here to launch games in RetroArch directly if you want. Or like I mentioned before, my Daijisho guide will show you how to use a front end to launch all your games from RetroArch, as well as the rest of the upcoming emulators, which I highly suggest, and that's going to be the focus of this guide here. If you want to use RetroArch to launch, I'll share a link in the description to a guide that covers that part, as it's not something I'm planning to do. The last thing I want to show, if you're using default RetroArch, all of your saves are located in the internal storage, RetroArch saves folder. Or if you want save states, the states folder. Unless you change the options we talked about before. We're done with RetroArch, let's move on. For Nintendo DS games, we want to use an emulator called Drastic. This one is found on the Play Store, and it's a paid app, but it's the best available one on Android. The alternative is Melon DS, but it's just not there yet for performance. Download Drastic from the Play Store and open it. You should see a pop-up about internal app data. Click OK. Should get a pop-up about audio permissions and allow. You can decline the desktop shortcut pop-up if you get that. The very first thing we want to do here is make it so Drastic is saving all its information in our internal storage and not in the locked Android storage area that we have trouble accessing. Head to Change Options, General, then at the bottom, click System Directory and change it to Scope Storage Folder. Now let's create a folder just here on the root of our internal storage called Drastic, and then click Use this folder. Let's restart Drastic by backing out to the main menu and selecting Exit Drastic. Head back in and it'll say it's going to transfer data. Click OK. Click Yes to delete source data. Now we're ready to change some settings. Go to Change Options and then External Controller. And click Select Key Mapping and then No Mapping. We're going to map the controls. Click Map Control and map the DS buttons to your controller. So X is top, Y is left, B is bottom, A is right, and so on. When you're done, let's do Map Special. I use R2 for screen swap, L3 for fast forward, R3 for open menu, and L2 for half screen swap. You can click the skip button for any of the other ones. Let's also disable mapped keys in overlay, so we don't get touch controls on screen. Head back and into General, and you can show FPS if you want, but I would also change Landscape Rotation to Landscape, or if you have a weird device, Reverse Landscape, whichever gives you the right orientation. Scroll down further and you'll see Default Layout, and you can select the layout you prefer for the windows. Feel free to try each and decide what you want. I'll show you how to do this in-game as well. This is just where you can set a default for every game. Now let's head all the way back to the main menu and click Load New Game, and you should get a file browser pop-up, or click the plus sign top right and navigate to where you stored your DS ROMs and select Use this folder. You should see all your DS games now. Let's start a game and see how it all looks, and everything works perfectly. One last thing to show, push your menu button, so R3 if you followed me, and you can now change some things if you want. With save and load states there as well, or you can map those if you want. Select Menu at the bottom and now scroll down to select Screen Layout. And this is just an easier way to try different layouts for what you want. Or you can edit them yourself through the Edit Screens menu. All of your saves will be in the folder we created, so internal storage, Drastic, in the backup folder. We're done with Drastic, let's move on. If you want to play PlayStation 1 games, there's two options for you. The first is you can use RetroArch with the Swan Station core I showed earlier, or if you want better performance, you can use Duckstation, which is available through the Play Store. I'll show you Duckstation as I like that better. Install it through the Play Store and open it. Click Next, and I would leave these all default except Emulation Screen Orientation to Landscape, and if you want to expand the display area to include the camera cutout if you have a phone like that. Click Next again, and this is where you want to import your BIOS file. Refer back to the start of this video if you ended up skipping here and have no idea what BIOS means. Click Import BIOS and go find your file and import it. It can be located anywhere, but I suggest making a BIOS folder in your ROMs folder just for easy organization. Click Next after importing. Don't skip this without importing a BIOS file. You need it. Now we have to tell Duckstation where our ROMs are. So click the plus sign and navigate to the folder that has all your PS1 ROMs. Click Next and then click Finish. You should see all your games in a list. But before all that, we have to change some settings. Click the menu top left and then App Settings. If you head to Graphics, you can change the upscale if you want. So if you click Resolution Scale, you can see options to upscale, and you can match the display of the device you're using. It all depends on if your hardware can handle it. If you start to see frame drops, I would scale it back. Head to the Achievements tab, and you can log in with Retro Achievements here. And honestly, that's about it settings-wise right now. Back to the main menu, top left, and this time go to Controller Settings. Under Touchscreen, Controller View, select None to remove touch controls. Now go to port 1 and we can map our controller. If you have analog sticks and want to use them, change controller type to analog controller. Then go down the list and map your controls. Pay attention to the name instead of the picture, as you might confuse yourself if you're not familiar with a PS1 controller. You can skip analog toggle and you can stop at right stick up being the last thing to map. Now swipe all the way to hotkeys. Let's map a few. I like toggle fast forward as L3, and then mapping the pause button as start and select, or whatever you prefer. Feel free to look at all of the options and map any hotkeys you want. Let's back all the way to the game list and start a game. And there we go. Everything should be working perfectly. Last thing to show, if you open the pause menu that we hotkeyed, look at the top right and you'll see some icons. Now, this is important. If you click the eye icon, you can adjust settings for this specific game only, so it creates per game profiles. But if you click the settings cog, you can change settings for all games. So just keep that in mind. It's a nice spot to make per game changes if you want. Lastly, if you want to move save data and other data between devices with Duckstation, or if you want to back up your data, go to the menu and then click Transfer Data, and now you can import or export. If you export, create a folder somewhere and export. and you'll see it gives you an option of what to export, and those files will show in that directory. We're done with Duckstation, let's move on. For Nintendo 64, we have the M64 Plus FZ emulator. It has a Pro version as well, which is up to you if you think those features are worth it to you. Or you can just use the free version, both of which are available through the Play Store. Install the version you want and open it. Allow notifications if you get that pop-up. First thing we want to do is tell it where our games are. So click the plus icon and navigate to your N64 ROM directory. It might take some time for all your games to show up, so just wait for it to finish scanning and adding. When it's done, head to the menu top left, then the Settings tab and Display. Now, Nintendo 64 is resource intensive, but if you have a high-end device, feel free to try a different rendered resolution to upscale here. You can also show frame rate if you want. Head back and select touchscreen. And scroll down to number of seconds before hiding and choose 0. This disables touch controls. Head back and select data, and now we want to have M64 use internal storage for saves instead of hidden in the Android settings, especially if you want to back up your own saves using CloudSync. Select Game Data Storage location and then External. And now click External Game Data location and create a folder in your internal storage and name it whatever you want. I'm just going to go with M64 Plus and then back out. Now head to the Profiles tab, Controller, and click the plus sign at the top, and you can just call this controller whatever you want. We're going to map the controls. Now just go through and map the buttons to your controller for Nintendo 64. I use R2 for Z, S is start, and I use the right analog stick for the C-pad mapping. And then you can map hotkeys if you want, but I usually just set select on my controller to the menu key. Now, right analog won't work for C-pad for every single game. You might want to change it up for some, like Super Smash Bros. For example. I like having X and Y on my controller as the C-pad buttons to have some easy jumping. Feel free to create another controller profile with different settings, and I'll show you later how to do per game settings for that. Let's back out and this time go to Profiles, select Profiles. For Controller 1 profile, select the profile we just created. Back out again and let's jump into a game. Touch controls will show for a second and then disappear. If you hate that for whatever reason, similar to how we created a controller profile, create a touchscreen profile with no buttons, and you can select that under Profiles and you'll never see touch controls again. 2 ways to skin a cat. Push and hold your menu key to get the menu to pop up, and you can exit, save state, and more. As promised, if you want to do per game configurations, when you're at the main screen with all your games, tap on one and then click Settings from the pop-out menu. Now you can change settings for this specific game only, including controller profiles. All your save data will be with other data in the folder we created, which was M64 Plus in the internal storage, if you need it. We're done with M64 Plus, let's move on. For Sega Dreamcast, we have two options. The first is you can use RetroArch with the core I showed earlier, or if you want better performance, you can use Redream, which is available through the Play Store. It has a free version, or you can do the paid version for higher resolutions. Open it and click Light Mode if you're not using Premium, and now let's go to Library, then Add Directory, and navigate to where you have your Dreamcast ROMs and select that folder. Now head to the Input tab and select Port A and change your input device. Mine shows my G-Cloud name, yours might show something different. Just choose whatever your controller option is. Now just go through and map for Dreamcast. Just click the X to remove existing binds or it messes things up. IMAP menu to select. Save files are located in the internal storage, Android, Data, IO recompiled Dream folder, and you may or may not have access to the files. We're done with Redream, let's move on. For Sega Saturn, we have YabaSanshiro 2. There's a free and a paid version on the Play Store, but it's the best way to play Saturn games on Android. Download and open the app from the Play Store and click Start. Sign in if you want to back up your save data. Head to Settings, top left, Settings, and select Game Directory. Delete the one that's there and click Add and navigate to your Saturn ROM folder, and then click OK. Scroll down and you can turn FPS on if you want. Also, I would lock landscape mode. Feel free to change the resolution if your device can handle it. Head to Player 1 input device and click Choose, and select your controller here. Now edit key map, and you might want a picture of a Saturn controller up to help you now. I'll leave a picture on screen to one I found for Saturn, but honestly I don't play Saturn that much, so I can't really help here. Just make sure to map the menu button. I use Select for that. If you don't see all your games, open the menu again and click Refresh Game List. Save files are hidden in the internal storage, Android, Data, Org, DevMeax, YabaSanshiro folder. We're done with Saturn, let's move on. For Nintendo GameCube and Wii, there's two different emulators to use. One is called Dolphin MMJR, and is currently still the best way to play these games, but it's no longer getting updates. However, the official Dolphin emulator, the development version, is quickly catching up and likely will be the best way in the future. I would try both for games you want to play and just see which runs best. On higher end hardware, Dolphin Official ends up being better, but for lower end, you'd want Dolphin MMJR. So let's start with Official. We don't want the Play Store version as it's out of date. Head to dolphin-mu.org and click the download button at the top, and then you want the most recent development version, whatever that is. Click the Android button and you should download the APK. Install that APK and then click Open. Click Yes or No if you want to share stats. Now, this is the GameCube tab, so let's add our GameCube games at the bottom right. Search for your GameCube ROM folder, you should see your games populate after. Do the same thing with the Wii tab and you'll see your Wii games as well. Now, head to the settings icon at the top then Graphics, and enable Compile Shaders. Scroll down to Enhancements, and you can change the internal resolution here if you want. Back out when you're done to the main settings menu and head to GameCube Input, then beside Controller 1, click the Settings cog, and scroll all the way down and map your controller for GameCube. Back out after and head to Wii Input this time. Settings cog, and now we have to map for Wii. Just going to warn you now, I hate the Wii controller mappings, so you may want to find a better guide for actually mapping the controls. But here's what I personally have and use. Head to Wii Remote button section and map those. It assumes you're holding the Wii Remote vertically, so turn your controller vertical and map it that way. So for example, D-pad left is now D-pad up, and so on and so forth. Scroll down to Extension and change it to Classic. Then select the Settings cog. Map it here to the Wii Classic controller. I don't map the home button, but it's up to you if you need it. Back out and create a profile for this. Just call it Classic if you want. I would also map the nunchuck controller as well and save it as a profile as well. You can call it nunchuck if that's easy. Now, some Wii games can only be played with certain controllers. So to set that, push and hold on a game and click Edit Game Settings, Wii Input, Cog, Profiles, and select the profile you want to use that we just created. So nunchuck, classic, or anything else you created. Let's boot up a game by just clicking it, and you'll see we get touchscreen controls. I usually use Android's navigation menu to click back in the app to get the side menu to appear here on the left. And then overlay controls, and toggle all. Saves are located in internal storage, Android, data, org, Dolphin MU. Now let's do Dolphin MMJR. Head to my description, Dolphin MMJR download link, and it'll download the APK instantly for you. If you're curious what you're downloading, it's Dolphin MMJR version 11505. Open the APK after downloading it to install it, and then open the app. Allow file access if that pops up. Now, same thing as before, let's click the plus sign at the top to navigate to our GameCube ROM directory. Then Wii tab at the bottom, and same thing for the Wii ROMs directory. Now click the settings cog at the top, then enhancements, and this is where you can change the resolution if you want. Back out to the main Dolphin menu, and this time click the three dots at the top right, and choose GameCube Input, then Controller 1, and select Emulated. Now map your controller for GameCube. Then the same menu, go to Wii Input, Remote 1, Emulated. Now map the buttons on the page for a normal Wii remote. It assumes you're holding it vertically again, so turn your controller vertically and map it that way. So once again, D-pad left is D-pad up, and so on. You can set shake X, Y, and Z to one button, like R2, but that might not work for every single game, just some of them. Same as before, change extension to classic and map that as well. Like before, you're on your own for mapping controllers in Wii. Every game is different, and games like Super Mario Galaxy need 3 different profiles. Same as before, when you're done and on the main screen with games, if you push and hold on a game, you can do a per game configuration. So set it to use whatever specific controller you want or any other settings. Jump into a game, and if you happen to choose a game that wants a Wiimote instead of a classic controller, you'll see an error about an unsupported device. You can do a per game configuration, which I suggest and showed before, or you can use Android's navigation to just click back to see Dolphin's in-game menu, and if you click the controller icon, you can swap between controllers you've set up. Just pick the one you want and click Reload Config. Let's also remove the touchscreen controls, which is the same menu, go to the 3 dots, then toggle controls, and toggle all. Save files for Dolphin MMJR are easier to get to. They're in the internal storage, Dolphin MMJR folder, under GC and Wii. We're done with Dolphin, let's move on. For PlayStation Portable, we have PPSSPP. As of right now, the best build to use is from the website, as it has retro achievement support. If you don't care about retro achievements, feel free to grab the Play Store version and install it. All the steps after install are the same. If you want retro achievements, head to the link in my description for PSP and download the most recent Android build. Install and open PPSSPP. Play Store users should as well. We want to create a PSP folder to store our data in, so keep that option checked, then click OK. Create a folder in your internal storage and call it whatever you want. I'm going to do PPSSPP. Then click OK. If you want your games to show here, click the Browse button and navigate to your PSP ROMs folder. Now head to Settings on the right. If you want to change the resolution, you can do so here. Scroll all the way down to enable FPS counter if you want it. Click Controls on the left and disable on-screen touch controls. Then click Control Mapping. Clear all and then map controls for a PSP. I like to map speed toggle to R2 for fast forwarding and pause to L2 for menu. If you click System on the left, you can see retro achievements at the top if you chose that build, and you can log in with your username and password. Head back to the main PPSSPP menu and open a game. If you hit your pause key, you should see an interface like mine, and you can create and load save states here, or hotkey those if you want in the controls menu. But you can also create per game configurations here as well, through Create Game Config. Saves are located in the PPSSPP folder we created on the internal storage. We're done with PPSSPP, let's move on. For Nintendo 3DS, there's two different emulators to use. Citra MMJ, which I find to be the most stable and best performance currently, and is still getting updated, or Citra Official Canary build. The Canary build has Vulkan support, which if you're going to go that version, I suggest enabling, but they've had stability issues lately. Like GameCube and Wii, try both for games you want to play and see what runs best. Let's do Citra Canary first. Head to citra-mu.org and then the Download tab, and then Manual Download. Scroll to Canary build and download the latest, whatever it is. Click the Android icon. Open the APK, install it, and open the app. Now we have to choose a folder for it to save data in. Click OK, and now create a folder called Citra Canary on your internal storage, and use that folder. Let's point it to our 3DS ROM folder, and read this text if you have CIA files for your 3DS ROMs. After all that, you should see your ROM start populating. Click the Settings cog top right, Gamepad, and configure your controller for 3DS controls. Then head back and into Graphics. Now, I would suggest Vulkan as your API here, as it'll be better in the future and even currently, even though stability isn't great right now. You can also choose to turn on asynchronous shader compilation or change their internal resolution. If games aren't running well using Canary, then you should try MMJ, which we're going to install in a second. Anyways, head back to the main game screen and open a game. Allow audio recording if you want, some games use that. Pull up Android's navigation menu and select back to get the Citra menu to show. Configure controls, toggle controls, and uncheck all to remove all touchscreen controls on screen. In the same menu, feel free to change landscape screen layout if you want, or select the Swap Screens tab too. Saves are located in the Citra Canary folder we created. Now let's install Citra MMJ. Head to the Citra MMJ link in my description and use the Storage Access Antutu APK version. Open the APK and install it, then open the app. Allow access to files if it asks. Click the Add Folder to Library and navigate to your 3DS ROM directory. Click the three dots top right and select Input Binding. Map the controls for 3DS. I use R3 for swap screen and L3 for fast forward. Then head back and click the Settings cog, and here you can change the screen layout if you want, as well as resolution. Head to the games list and boot up a game. You can use Select to bring up Citra's menu if you mapped Select, or Android's back or the home icon on screen. Click Settings and then hide input buttons to hide the touchscreen controls. You can also scroll down and do some on-the-fly changing of screen layout, resolution, and more. Back out to that menu and you can create a custom layout if you want, although it's not super intuitive, so I suggest using the stock options. Saves for this one are located in the internal storage, Android, Data, COM and Tutu benchmark folder. We're done with Citra, let's move on. For PlayStation 2, we have Aethersx2. Now, you don't want to use the Play Store version. We need to use version 3.668, which is the last version before the developer added ads, and it's also the one that will work with front ends like Daijisho, which we're going to talk about at the end. Head to the Aethersx2 link in my description and download and install the APK, then open the app. Click Next, read everything if you want, and then click Next. Expand to cutout area if you want, and set the screen orientation to landscape, as well as change the upscale if you want, and then Next. Leave it as optimal safe defaults, and now we want to import the BIOS for this. So click Import BIOS and point it to your BIOS file for PS2. If you ended up skipping here, refer back to the start of the video to learn more about what BIOS files are. Then select it with the radio button and choose Next. Now click the plus icon and navigate to where you have your PS2 ROM stored. Click Next and Finish. Now let's head to the menu top left, then App Settings. Head to the Achievements tab and you can log in with Retro Achievements here. And honestly, that's about it settings-wise. Back to the main menu, top left, and this time go to Controller Settings. Under Touchscreen, Controller View, select None to remove touch controls. Now go to Port 1 and we can map our controller. Then go down the list and map your controls. Pay attention to the name instead of the picture, as you might confuse yourself if you're not familiar with a PS2 controller. You can skip analog toggle, and you can stop at right stick being the last thing to map. Now swipe all the way to hotkeys. Let's map a few. I like toggle fast forward as L3, and then mapping the pause button as start and select, or whatever you prefer. Feel free to look at all the options and map any hotkeys you want. Let's back all the way to the game list and start a game. And there we go. Everything should be working perfectly. Last thing to show, if you open the pause menu that we hotkeyed, look at the top right and you'll see some icons. This is the same as Duckstation from before. Now, this is important. If you click the eye icon, you can adjust settings for this specific game only. So create per game profiles. But if you click the settings cog, you can change settings for all games. So just keep that in mind. Nice spot to make per game changes if you want. Lastly, if you want to move save data and other data between two devices with Aethersx2, or if you want to back up your data, go to the menu and click Transfer Data, and now you can import or export. If you export, create a folder somewhere and export, and you'll see it gives you an option of what to export, and those files will show in that directory. We're done with Aethersx2, let's move on. For the PlayStation Vita, we have the Vita3k emulator. It's the only option currently, and like the Switch emulators, which we'll talk about soon, you'll have varied success with running things, so don't expect perfect compatibility. Vita also doesn't have a way to map controls, so you have to hope that whatever controller or device you're using has controls properly mapped automatically. Head to Vita3k.org and the Download tab, and then grab Android Nightlies. Grab the most recent APK and install it and open the app. Select your language and then Next. Now you need to download the firmware by push and holding and downloading the font package. Both are linked. Then click Install Firmware File to install each separately. Then click Next. Next again, and click OK. Scroll down and close, and uncheck Show Next Time if you want. Create a user. Auto user login if you want, then click your username. And now we're into a Vita, basically. Go to the top tab and choose Controls from the menu on top and then Overlay. Uncheck Show Gamepad Overlay. Click File, then install PKG or Zip or VPK, depending on what type of Vita ROMs you have. Then navigate to that ROM file and choose it. It'll show an installing screen that might take a very long time, and sometimes looks like it's stuck when it isn't. I suggest doing one game first and seeing if your controls work before adding any others. To exit a game, swipe to get Android's navigation, then click Back and Escape top right. Saves are located in the internal storage, Android, Data, Org, Vita3k Emulator, Files folder. We're done with Vita3k, let's move on. For Nintendo Switch, there's also two different emulators to use. One is called Skyline Edge version 69, and while it's no longer being updated, it's still the most stable version. The other is Yuzu Early Access, which is a paid app as well, and that'll soon be the go-to emulator for a lot of games. Nintendo Switch is a tough one. You're likely going to run into a lot of issues with emulation on these, so keep that in mind. Head to the Skyline Edge link in my description and download the APK and then install it and open the app. It's going to open a file browser, navigate to your Switch ROMs directory and use that folder. Don't ask me for Switch ROMs, I can't help you. Now click the settings cog and then navigate to where you have your prod keys and title keys. Again, I can't help you with these either, you'll have to source them on your own. But either way, you can't skip these or nothing will run. Disable docked mode. Show performance statistics if you want to see FPS, and screen orientation to landscape. Display cutout enabled if you want. Then scroll down to Input and configure controller 1. Make sure controller type is Handheld plus Pro Controller. Disable the on-screen controls. Scroll down to Sticks and map your Nintendo Switch controls. Saves are located in the internal storage, Android, Data, Skyline.mu, Files folder. That's it for Skyline, let's move to Yuzu. I suggest Yuzu Early Access, and that's what I'm going to show. So download and install it from the Play Store. Keep in mind, like Vita, there's no controller remapping as of this video. Open the app when you're ready, click Get Started, and now we need to select your prod keys and then Next again. Again, I can't help you with locating prod keys. Now navigate to your Switch ROMs directory and click Next. Continue. Click the Settings cog. I would suggest joining the Yuzu Discord and seeing if there's a GPU driver for your device, as that greatly improves performance. I'll leave that link in the description as well. Now you need to install firmware as well. Like before, I can't help with this. Head back to the main game screen and boot up a game. Use Android's navigation menu to hit back to bring up the Yuzu menu, and then click Overlay Options, Toggle Controls, and Toggle All. Save data is in the internal storage, Android, Data, Org, Yuzu, EMU. We're done with Skyline and Yuzu. And that's it. That's pretty much all of the most popular emulators for Android and how to set them up. Please don't leave a comment about bad performance for any of the emulators. It'll be on you to research the best settings for your specific device. And like I said before, Vita and Switch will have a ton of performance and compatibility issues. Also, like I said before, I can't help you with Switch prod keys, firmware, ROMs, or anything like that. You'll have to use Google to find your way around. Your next step after installing the emulators you want is to watch my Daijisho video guide to get a front end set up to launch all of these games easily. It's what I've been showing on screen for the last minute or so I wouldn't skip this step, and the only reason it's not all in one video is it would make it way too long. It's already long as it is. Hope you liked the video and hope it helped with your setup. Please don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow, and hope you all have a good one.